So as we come back and start thinking about the subject EDU121, can I ask a couple of people, let's go through the assignments that you have. So there's 3 assignments plus an unassessed collate resources. So the first assignment is forum posts that you'll do each week. And then the next assignment is your worldview, and the third assignment is 2 other worldviews. With the first assignment, the forum post, I've said that it's 100 words, but if you want to write 200 or 300 words, it may help articulate what you're wanting to say. If you want to include 2 or 3 scholarly resources and some references at the end, it could help you gain a higher grade because it could show more academic thinking, though it's the ideas that you communicate and your ability to engage with the ideas that will give you the grades. As well as that, I would encourage you for a third or more of your forum post to reflect on what you think, because it's important in teaching that you're authentic and you own your thoughts and ideas. So in the forum post, I think a third or more should be reflecting on what you think of the resource, how you engage with it. But you could quickly go to Google Scholar, look up 2 or 3 more resources and interact with them as well. And you could add those resources to your list of resources for each of the 12 weekly topics. And you could also save some of those as well, which is what we as lecturers and teachers do. We build these lists of resources up each week. So with the forum post, Matilda, what are your thoughts on forum posts? How do you go well with it? Do you have any questions? How do you go badly with it?
Well, so obviously you said that we need to show understanding of what we're the resources that we're interacting with, and so you've recommended that we use references and such, which confuses me a little bit because you said it could help us get a better mark, but I'm the type of person who you need to tell me a yes or a no. If I need to do it, I'll do it. If I don't need to do it, then I won't do it, you know, that type of thing. So I just had, that was a question. Is that something that we have to do with the forum?
I guess you have to decide what sort of grade you're going for. If you're happy with a pass, credit, and possibly distinction, then you probably wouldn't even need any references. You could just say, I'm interacting with it. This is what I think of it. Here's 100 words. But if you're wanting to get that distinction or high distinction, then you would want to interact with 2 or 3 resources and have references at the end. And it depends on your commitment to scholarly learning about the topic that's looked at each week. So if you're interested in Freud and how he helps you with teaching and education, and you've got the brain space for it and the time for it, then you could quickly gather some resources. And I think as teachers, we have to be good at quickly gathering resources, particularly upper secondary teachers. Primary teachers, you need to gather resources, but resources about the areas that you're more specifically looking at, such as how students learn, and there's a lot of other things going on in primary education as well, rather than becoming an expert on the solar system or geology or something like that. But then again, you may be interested in specific areas. Does that help answer a little bit, Matilda?
Yeah, it does. It definitely does. I guess I'm just thinking into it and going, well, if you don't have the brain space one week, you'll fail. I'm like, no, don't fail. So, no, but I really think the class forum is a really good idea for not just for us students, but for you to see that we have been interacting with the resources and the learning, but then also for us to set the learning in our own minds. Last year, while I was at uni, I went through so many resources and they went in one ear and out the other, and that was it, and that were gone. And there was no way for me to remind myself, no, you know what these resources are about, but this will actually be be a great way for me to build up some sort of portfolio about my learning and what I'm actually going through, I guess.
Yeah. And exactly, I would encourage you each week to have a folder for the subject, and within that subfolders, and you could even have a subfolder for each of the 12 weeks if they were gathering lots of information, or for those weeks that gather lots of information. And as well as that, I'd have a Word document where you'd collect notes, and you might even put down web addresses that you go back to. And in order to get it into your mind and life and memory, I would interact a little bit with ideas that you come across, and you may forget those in 3 days, but it's possible to interact with them, to colour them in bright yellow, to, so you get a hold of something and you colour it in and go up to the colour, and you do some notes as well. So look at various ways of engaging with those questions, and I think already we've decided that subconscious, the world around you, the family of the children, all of those are important things to consider in thinking and teaching. And so there is that. And then we've got the 2 other assignments that we're looking at as well. Let's have a brief look at assignment 2.
I'm sorry.
Yeah.
I just had a question for the first one, just before we move on. It says that the word count's 2,000 words, and with a 100-word post, that won't hit the 2,000 word mark. So I'm wondering, like, how strict is that with everything, and do replies count as in the word count as well?
Yeah, so quite rightly, the 2,000 words, you will still get a pass or a credit if you were to give 1,000 words, but you'd lower your grade. With the 2,000 words, you can either build up to that by having 200 words per post times 10, or the other way you could build up to that is when you finally hand it in, you could add a bit of an intro and conclusion. And again, in answer to Matilda's question, these are not have to do in order to get past credit, but they may only take 10 or 15 minutes longer, and they could give you a higher grade. But my encouragement is, don't stress about it, enjoy the journey, and then think about adding a little bit there. So 200 words and intro and conclusion would build it up. Are there further questions about the forum? Yeah.
Just quickly to clarify, obviously with like your other assessments, there's sort of that 10% on either side in terms of your word count. If you go over on your forum posts, is that going to affect your grade because you've not been concise enough?
It would affect your grade if you go over 300 words. So I'll say 300 words max. Yeah. So over that.
Yeah, me too. Same.
And I won't get totally upset if you do go a little bit over, but if you're over 300 words, that would indicate that you should save it as a diary entry, your 700 words, and then you should quickly edit it down to 300 words for your post, and save your 700 word diary entry as well.
I think I took mine from 450 to about 320.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I'm not going to be overly worried, particularly in the early stages of your first 2 or 3 or 4 posts. Yeah.
That was the other question. In our document that we submit at the end, do we include people's responses to ours or our responses to other people's posts?
No, you don't need to include your responses at all. You certainly do need to do the responses, but they don't need to be in the document at the end. The suggestion is that you put all your posts in one Word document, and then you cut and paste out of that into each weekly post. And that way you'll have one document that you can submit in week 10.
Awesome. Thank you.
Yeah.
Any other questions?
Yeah, well, oh, sorry, I think there's a few was going. Are we going to get any feedback on those posts before they're submitted to be graded?
You may not get feedback. So if you are desperate for feedback, then perhaps send me an email and get in touch. I guess the challenge will be with 45 students giving a post each week, and then with that being 10 posts, that would be 450 posts to respond to. But if 4 or 5 students are panic stricken and want some feedback and send me an email, then I'm happy to respond to that. As well, sometimes it's probably best to respond to the whole class like we're doing now as well. But certainly if I got 2 or 3 or 4 or 5 emails saying I'm concerned about this, I'm concerned about that, then I'd probably respond to the whole class as well as to the individual student, which is what we've done already a little bit too. So if each week you find something you're very confused about or concerned about, certainly send me an email, and then I'll probably respond to the whole class. Okay.
I had an interesting moment in going to write my forum post. So I used the outdated course outline, and I went through and I just about wrote the full thing before going back and reading some other forum posts and went, where are these guys getting all the sources from? I went up back and reread and I was like, oh no, I've used the wrong sources to write my statement. But that's okay. We got there in the end.
Yeah, and that's worth being aware of. The course can vary a little bit from year to year. And so where possible, use the updated Moodle website course. Yeah.
When you say 300 words max, I presume that's per post, or are you saying 2,300 words being...
And that would, of course, if you went 300 words all the way through, then you'd have 3,000 words at the end. That is stretching it a little bit. At this stage, I don't think I would be overly savage on that. Particularly, I like to encourage students to think and to engage with the material and to enjoy their working through the material. And sometimes I think making it too short can be a problem. Though for some people making it too long can cause them stress as well. So I think it's important that you enjoy the journey. You're learning for yourselves very much as well as getting a grade. Yeah. If I can mention briefly now the second assignment, and the second assignment is about your view of the world. I've put a video up on the second assignment and the third assignment, but with each of these assignments, particularly the second assignment, we're interested in how you view the world around you, and also how you are going to understand yourself. And so the second assignment is 1,500 words, 30% of your grade. Third assignment is going to be the longer assignment, 50% of your grade. With your second assignment, you're looking at how you think about the world, how you view the world and your understanding of the world. Any questions about the second assignment and your view of the world? I would encourage you there to include things that we're going to discuss over the next 5 weeks about how we have a modern Western view of the world. And secondly, you could look at, you have a Christian view of the world. And within that, there could be a denominational Christian view of the world, whether you come from a Methodist or a Calvinist or a Catholic or Anglican or whatever background. And so you could reflect on your particular way of viewing the world and how that influences your teaching. And then in the third assignment, we're looking at how people may have different views of the world and how that influences their teaching. And we want 2 groups, of which one must be Australian Aboriginal or Torres Strait Islander there. And I've put a video up on each of those. Are there questions about assignments 1, 2, or 3?
I had a question. Sorry,
yeah.
you go.
Mine was just, are the assessment notices and the rubric in the unit outline correct for those 2 assignments? And if not, is there somewhere else that we can find those?
I think they are correct. So
Okay, cool.
I think they're all correct. Yep.
Cool. Thanks.
My question was just the second assignment, it has a list of factors that you could include. How many of those would you say we should be including? Like, there's a long list of like examples. Like, do you want us to kind of pick one and stick with it, or pick 2 or 3 and discuss those?
I think usually around about 3 or so works best. If you go for many more than 3, then it becomes too thin on each point. If you go for only 1, then that can be a bit like backing just one horse, it's got to win. However, I think an assignment is often stronger if it has one central argument overall. So as you're working with 3 or so of those ideas, I would think about what is an argument that you could put forward in your introduction and conclusion that would draw it all together as one assignment. I would also think about interaction with strong scholars. So avoid web pages, because you can't get a list of 10 or more scholarly resources at the end of the web page. You can't always identify who the scholar is who writes the web page or why they're writing. Whereas a scholarly journal article from Google Scholar or from the library resource will be stronger. And then I would often see it valuable to interact with at least one scholarly resource per paragraph, and sometimes 2 or 3 or more scholarly resources per paragraph, to show that you're engaging with the resources. At the same time, I would think that up to a third of the project could be personal and reflect on your own personal views. However, you might want to write up your personal views in a journal first and say, my view of the world has come from when I was 2 years old, this happened, and I was raised in a Christian family, and they taught me this, and my grandfather and uncle taught me that. And then when that becomes sort of 5,000 words, that's not 1/3 of your assignment. And so you then edit it down what you put into the assignment, just the key points that come out of the resource. Yeah. Other questions on the assignments?
Just on the back of the language you were using just then in the second assessment, because it has a reflective element, we are using personal like language. My experience has been.
Yeah, that's a good point, is that use of the first person, my experience, is very important for you to get to know yourself and develop authenticity, and particularly as a Christian. However, it can at times become self-indulgent, and it can also become a very limited view of the world. And like the iceberg, your views about yourself might only be 5% of your thinking about yourself that's above the water. There is so much under the water. So you, if you can, try and dig down a little bit deeper. The other thing you can do, certainly, is that you can write a journal page for yourself about your view about yourself, and then think about the point that you have raised, and then go to Google Scholar and search for 2 or 3 scholarly views on that. And so in the paragraph, you might only have 1 or 2 sentences. And one of them could be, as a born-again evangelical Christian who speaks to God each day in prayer and believes God speaks back through the Bible, I see this living relationship with God as important. Now, having written that out, rather than going on and on for paragraph after paragraph, you might then want to go to Google Scholar and look up the born-again personal evangelical view, and you might find this scholar has said that about it, this scholar has said that about it. So you've then got your own personal journal, which is where you're working through what you think about yourself. But then you've got your post or your assignment, where you're actually taking your view into dialogue with scholars and what they say. Yeah. And so that's a second step or third step from your personal reflection, because just your personal reflection really won't necessarily be everything. It could be a response to the pizza you ate or whatever. Yeah, or you didn't get a good night's sleep, or yeah.
So we should shy away from using first person.
I think you could use first person for a few sentences, but and you could even use first person for a whole paragraph, but realize that beyond that, it's becoming less valuable in the assignment. And yeah, so I wouldn't leave it out totally, because I think first person is very important. Søren Kierkegaard, who I mentioned before, the Danish philosopher, he said first person is the most important thing that you will have, because you are being alive and authentic, and you're actually doing something when you use the first person. However, I can also see the dangers with first person, in that it can be just musing over all the half-truths that you've told yourself about yourself for so long. Yeah. So my rule would be, you know, a couple of sentences, maybe even a paragraph, could be even near the beginning of the assignment, or it could be in the last third of the assignment. But I would think then move on to engaging with scholars who write about the issues that you raise. And on the personal relationship with God, it intrigues me that there are probably Christians out there who don't follow that more personal approach. And so if this is assignment 3, if I've got people in my class who don't have that personal relationship with God, then I've got to be aware that they're seeing the world differently to the way I am. And I've got to think, how do I relate to them as well, but also remain true to myself? Other questions?
Yes, it is a bit of a silly one. But when we have our assignments, is there a certain time that we can start our assignments? And when they're due, obviously we can hand them in, submit them early, sorry. But when it's the due date, what's the cutoff?
Yeah, so in answer to starting early, I would suggest, yes, if you've got the time to start early, then certainly do that. The educationalists would say that there could be some concerns in that if you don't have all of the information, then you may find it harder. So here we are raising ideas even today about how thinking involves a lot more than just thinking. And this is the rabbit trail problem when writing an assignment. If you discover something that's a bit interesting and you take a few steps in that direction, before you know, you've gone quite a lot of kilometers down this rabbit trail. And so you've got to remain true to the question and the objective. So one way to help that is to go back to the objectives in the student information and in the information that I provide, and to read over each of those paragraphs and to read over the objectives and make sure you keep true to that. Yeah, so that's one solution. Then I guess you could collect resources, ideas, those sorts of things. You'd have to check the website for the exact idea about the time of day, in that varies a little bit from year to year. Now, in answer to the question that some students ask, can you send a draft through? Yes, you could possibly email me a draft. If this is early in your study series, this is one of your first subjects on the way through and you're wanting to pick up speed, then there's the possibility of you know, me looking over a draft, and it may vary how much feedback you got on that, but some students may find that very, very valuable. Yeah. Other questions?
Yeah, it said the forum posts are due like Friday and then Sunday and stuff, but you, in the message that you sent to everyone to get like the possibility of full marks, you wanted us to put it in for our lecture. So is it due before the Thursday or is it due Friday?
Yeah, so for the next forum post, I think you would do best and perhaps get a slightly high grade if you did it before next Thursday. But if circumstance make it difficult, then I would like to leave the forum post option. I think I've made it up to a week afterwards. Is that true? Or certainly a day afterwards you have the day after. But yes, there could be a fraction of a mark taken off there. Okay. Other questions? All right, if there's no more questions, certainly send them through to me. I want to look now at a resource that you'll find helpful. And this resource is on DeBono's Thinking Hats. So hands up anyone who's seen DeBono's 6 Thinking Hats before.
Just quickly, are you able to let Shyla back into the meeting? Her Wi-Fi died and she got cut out.
Yeah, and hopefully she's back in now. But yeah, so thank you.
Yeah, that's right.
So the idea of the 6 Thinking Hats of Edward DeBono's is that it would be easier to get your students to think about thinking if you could give them the experience of thinking in different ways. And so Edward DeBono said that you go down to a cheap shop and buy some black hats, blue hats, and green hats and get your students to wear them in their groups. So you can either have the whole group of 5 students or so with the black hat, or you could have the different people in the group wearing different hats, and then you could get them to swap their hats. The idea is that you could think in different ways if you put on a different hat. So the black hats, cautious critical thinking, the blue hat, the big picture, organizational, how do we make the biggest viewpoint of this issue that we're looking at? So the whole of the history of it, all views. The green hat, new growth, life, how are we creative critical thinkers? And then the red hat, emotions and feelings, we've already said is an important part of thinking. How do I feel about it? White hat, like paper, gathering information. Yellow hat, looking forward with optimism to the bright sunny day ahead. So if we were to take environment and global warming, can someone tell me black hat thinking? What would you do if you're going to be critical, gathering of information, the black hat thinking?
You definitely be trying to be discerning in what you pick out as truth and what you're taking as heavily biased, etc.
Yeah, I like that word discerning. So you try and label things. And one way you could do this is blue hat number 2, is that you put a whiteboard up and you could put for and against. And so evidence for global warming on one side, evidence against. And then as you put the information up, black hat, you could actually critically evaluate how do we know that there is global warming. My understanding is that 10 of the 11 hottest days in the world have been in the last 10 or 20 years. The bushfires have been stronger. So on the positive side, I see that there is evidence there for global warming. evidence against global warming sometimes comes from people who say that sunspots vary and that over 100,000 years you might get temperature variations for other reasons as well. And then there's other reasons that they could put up. But when in this subject of critical thinking, we've already said that it's the group you hang around with influences how you put the information together. So there's social concepts come in to that as well. Other thoughts on black hat critical thinking about global warming?
I was just going to say, I could be wrong, but if you're taking on a black hat thinking and you were referring to global warming, you could look at, if you concluded that global warming, is happening, you could look at what the world has done in the past to encourage it to progress and get worse, and then you could reverse that in order to find a way to fix it, maybe.
Yeah. And Matilda, would you include things like sewage? And so in London, they had a lot of people got ill, and then they introduced the sewage systems in London. And is that the sort of thing you're possibly thinking of, or it could be different?
So everything. Mostly stuff on a larger scale that's affecting the world. You'd probably rank, well, you'd put on the blue hat thinking and you'd rank the things that are affecting the global warming in a most affecting and then least affecting, and then you'd probably work through that and try and find ways around the things that are put on the black hat thinking, and then you'd assess what can we do to minimize these acts that are making global warming really bad.
And I like that movement between black hat and blue hat. That is, you got the big picture and then you're going into the specific details. And when it comes to, if you go to a doctor, you hope that he's going to use some cautious critical thinking. And I've been to doctors, and maybe there's a young trainee doctor who leaps in and says, I think this is the case. And then the doctor will put on the blue hat and say, woo, before we make a decision, we need to look at the 8 or 10 options that could be the cause of the problem. I went to the doctor once with a pain around about my abdomen region, and the doctor immediately walked around behind me and punched me in the back of the abdomen and said, does this hurt? And then punched me on the other side and asked, does this hurt? Does anyone know what the doctor did? Nice, short, little, kind lady doctor. It was actually, I had an infected kidney and I only felt it on one side of the body when she punched me, and the other side it wasn't too bad. And that was her quick assessment. And she's a very good doctor, but she looks at all different options, and that was my experience on that one day. So critical thinking is looking in detail at specific things, but blue picture thinking is looking at all of the options. Someone got a thought on the green hat thinking? What's creative way of thinking about global warming? Mine is to mow all our lawns and get our lawn clippings, and if we do that more often, then we'll be gradually storing all the carbon in our lawn clippings, and then we'll have a mountain of lawn clippings. But that's my creative thinking.
I was just going to bring it back to an example.
Yes.
When the bushfires were happening quite recently, the government, I think it was the government, had stepped in and said, let's save water. And it kind of brought on this problem-solving approach. And the government included like everybody in the world. So it said, all right, minimize on this, we're going to start restrictions of water, we're going to do this, we're going to do that. And it was a very problem-solving kind of mindset. I guess that could be an example of green hat thinking.
Oh, exactly. And I like the way you bring in government there, and certainly green hat, thinking outside the box. You're realizing that it's a social problem that we are facing, and we face the problem between what does an individual do, is it significant, as opposed to what do 7 billion people in the world do. And so there's all sorts of creative aspects there. Anyone got another creative?
I was just going to say that I think with the green hat, it's more of with problem solving, coming up with different perspectives, and like you said, thinking outside the box. So it's not just trying to, it could be improving already in place, like initiatives or things like that, but actually having a look at other options that could work.
Yeah, that's great. So I think certainly thinking outside the box is the secret. Other options. Someone got thoughts on the emotions. So what's an emotional response? Both sides. An emotional response for, we need to do more about the global warming, and then an emotional response, yay, there's too much of that. We need to do different things. So who's got a thought on the emotional red hat opportunity for your student in your class to put on the red hat, to stand up and to share with the class? What's an emotional response to global warming?
Yeah, I had an idea, like the campaigning about, you know, let's leave a better planet for our children and that sort of thing is kind of, you know, appealing to your emotional side and connection to family, which then places the responsibility on the individual or the organization.
Yeah, I like that. So think of what's driving the emotions, connection with the family, connection with the future. Someone else on emotional side of things?
I think there's so many emotive links with the images that we've seen that are linked to the outcome of global warming. So even the discussion at the moment about global warming and the floods that we've just had, and the evidence that have said we're going to experience more and more of these, the photos of those experiences and the stories of those experiences and the emotional response, the photos in Australia of the droughts and the animals that had essentially passed away and then withered away in dead fields, those kind of photos that create such an emotive response, like Red Hat thinking of like also how we can create emotional responses.
Yeah, and that raises whole questions about media and what media are doing. And if their goal is to sell advertising by attracting more interest, it raises questions about the whole emotional. Are they truly interested in flood victims, or are they interested in increasing their ratings? And politics raises that same question as well, doesn't it? It's
totally, but it was people's vision of seeing those images on media that then led to their donation to different effects. So if those images weren't out there, the people wouldn't have had something to emotively respond to imagine themselves in that situation, to raise money, send water, send feedlets of the droughts. At the moment, there's Facebook page and post after post about people being like, I'll drive hours and come shovel mud out of your house. Not having that visceral emotional reaction to the thing that was happening. Or it's that video where they pull the straw out of the turtle's nose that got shared millions of times that made people switch to paper straws. Those, whether it's just for media clicks, the flow on effect of sharing those images and the emotional response can be a net positive.
That's great. And then we've got the white hat, which is collecting information. So you gather the information there. And if the students have got computers and access, they could look up the information, give time for that. And then we've got the yellow hat, which is the optimism. And I would balance a yellow hat with a ugly brown or whatever you use as a color to represent the negative side of things. So you could actually have the negative side. So let's just take a few moments now at the end. Can I get everyone to write down what are 2 or 3 or more things that stand out to you from these first 2 hours, looking at thinking and critical thinking in your life and in the classroom? And then we're going to each week do some forums on that, collect resources on that. But in assignment 2, we're going to think about, how do you think about the world around you? What's your worldview? And in other subjects that you're studying, you'll also be thinking about worldview and theology, and you might be able to bring some of that over into this subject. But I think it's important that you own your way of thinking about the world. And we've touched on some aspects of thinking in today's class, particularly enlarged our understanding of thinking from just critical thinking to realize there's emotions involved, there's families, there's wider world around. So can I get a few people now to share what stands out to you from today's class?
I'm more than happy to if no one else wants to.
Yeah.
I had three. The thing that stood out to me was the complexity of thinking, and that it's a lot more than what I realized. I don't know if this is the right word for it, but subconscious influences on our thinking. So things that impact our thoughts that we don't recognize. And then my last one was the wider influence on kids' thinking and maybe even their behavior. It might not necessarily be that they're behaving badly, but they're actually experiencing something that we might not understand because of their thinking or understanding things.
Yeah, exactly. That's great. Someone else?
Yeah, mine was pretty much,
I'm sorry.
Mine was pretty much the same. Like think about that there might actually be a whole bunch of reasons that we're not aware of as to why kids' behavior is off or different to how it normally would be.
Yeah, that's brilliant. Someone else?
I think it's easy to think, like before looking at this, that everyone thinks like you, and looking at how social media algorithmically puts you in an echo chamber where you are validated by opinions that are similar to your own. But today, talking about also the different models of thinking that changed over time, but also culturally, like reinforcing this idea that there are different models of thinking. And I think, as Ruben and a few other people said earlier on, that are good for different things. So being flexible in our thinking and our process of thinking, and with those hats, being flexible and being able to apply different thinking strategies to different situations.
Yeah, and I think that's important too with let's say a pilot of an aeroplane. Can anyone tell me why a pilot of an aeroplane is not asked to use careful logical thinking to go through all of the things that are going on when they land the plane? So a pilot lands the plane, often he might be asked to rely on intuition and gut feeling when he lands the plane, and that seems counterintuitive. Can anyone tell me what might be a reason for an airplane pilot responding intuitively and with gut feeling rather than logically going through all the things that are possible?
I'd say that's possibly because it's like we've talked before about the subconscious understanding. Everything they've learned before, that's coming out in the gut feeling.
Yeah.
And that it gives them brain space to, if something happens, they can use up that extra brain power, I guess you could say, to specifically focus on a problem.
And this idea of giving brain space is another reason why we encourage people and students to use pen and paper. So if you write some things down or get a whiteboard and put all of the information over the whiteboard, you can sometimes handle more information than you can just in your cognitive conscience. So there are ways to expand brain space, and often you're doing that in an essay. So in an essay, you sometimes don't fully understand everything you think until you write it down. And then during the essay over many days, you're working the ideas backwards and forwards. And in many days, you're expanding the space that you're working with. But in the case of the pilot, as you mentioned very well, is that if they've practiced what's happening, they're using their intuition because they only have split seconds to respond. And if there are 100 bits of information coming through dials and lights and everything going on, they don't have time to go through all 100. They've got to respond very quickly. And the same in sport, they often practice and practice and practice because they've got to respond. So sometimes intuition can be better because it gives more space. Someone else on things that we've learned today and their application in the classroom.
I thought it was interesting because there's just so many different types of analysis that people have done into thinking. And it's made me realize you can't really box it up. Like, you can't put thinking in a box. You have to, I think the point of all of this was really to prompt more thinking, really, is what all this research has done, is to prompt more thinking and then to prompt discussions from that. And that's what one thing I liked about Bono's hats, I think. Is that a lot of the topics, I was thinking of questions, and then the questions prompt more discussions. Like the black hat is kind of, is there a problem? How do we figure out if there is a problem? And the blue hat is, what is the problem? And then there's, what can we do to fix it? How can we fix it? Like, I think the cool thing about thinking is that it prompts so much discussions and stuff. Yeah.
And that leads on to next week. Next week, we're looking at Socrates, who talks about the importance of questions. We're looking at Plato, who talks about the importance of ideals and higher ways of understanding the world. And then Aristotle says, his student, let's get down to the details. Let's observe, let's describe what's going on. So we'll look at those three approaches to thinking by the ancient Greeks next week. We've got a couple of readings that go up from Plato that you can look at about his idea of the cave next week. And so you've got a forum post on that. And then in the weeks that follow, we go on to the Christian Hebrew idea of the holistic thinking. And so what's the spiritual side? What's worship got to do with thinking? What's holistic integration of the whole body got to do with thinking? So we look at that. And then we move on through some of the other great thinkers through time and what they teach us. And then each time we're considering in the classroom, what does this mean for us to do a better job in the classroom? And today we've recognized that there is such a diversity of students and there's diversity of thinking going on. And we've come up with some ideas as to how we can use that, including DeBono's thinking hats and Freud's observation that there's more going on in the subconscious, and the spotlight on the theatre of your brain spot may in fact not recognize everything that's there. Sometimes you've got to let your feelings and other things have some expression so you can work that out as well. So thank you each one. I've thoroughly enjoyed being a part of this class today with each one of you. I've thoroughly valued your contributions. I can see you're all doing great, and everyone will do well in this class because you're all thinking people, but you're authentically reflecting on all of these things. So over the next 12 weeks, I'm sure you'll do very, very well and gain a great deal out of the class. So thank you. If you have any emergency questions, speak up. Otherwise,
great. Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Actually, a really quick question, Sam.
Yes.
Do you want us to call you Sam or Dr. Sam?
Probably Dr. Sam, but I'm happy with either. But yeah, Dr. Sam.
Great, Dr. Sam it is.
Sounds good.
Awesome.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Thank you.